In a distant future, many races lived together under the great rule of the Galactic Union, and they shared knowledge and trade and sometimes fear. But there was one thing that stayed only in stories and old songs, and that was the name of humans, who were said to be the wildfire of the old galaxy, who fought the impossible wars and then vanished without a trace. And with time, even their name became a myth that children heard before sleep and laughed about as something that never was real. And on the bright world of Valora Prime, a young historian named Alara worked in a great archive full of ancient relics and broken machines and forgotten codes, and she always liked to study the lost ones because she believed that every story came from truth, no matter how small it was, and she spent long hours looking through old fragments of data that nobody cared to read anymore. And one day, while searching through damaged records, she found something that made her heart beat fast, because it spoke about a people who had blue and green worlds, and they were called humans, and the text said they were strong and stubborn and full of hope, and that they disappeared into the dark beyond the stars. And she read the words again and again, not sure if she was dreaming and she wanted to tell someone, but she knew no one would believe her because humans were only myths. Far away from Valora Prime, a Union patrol ship called the Horizon moved through empty space near the border of the Silent Expanse, which was a region of space that no one entered because ships that went there never returned. And Captain Darren Holt, who was young but brave, stood on the bridge watching strange readings appear on his screen. And his first officer said it was only background noise, but Darren shook his head and told them to keep tracking it. And the signal became stronger and clearer, and soon it was no longer random. It was a repeating pattern like a message, and it came from deep within the Silent Expanse, where no one dared to go. And Darren looked at the dark void ahead and felt something cold in his chest, but also a strange pull, like something was calling him. When Alara received the transmission from the patrol command asking her to come to the investigation, she could not believe it, because they said it might relate to one of the old human myths, and she packed her tools and notes and flew out in a small transport ship to meet the Horizon. And when she arrived, she was nervous because she had never left Valora Prime before, and the stars looked endless and beautiful but also lonely. And when she entered the ship, she met Captain Darren, who looked tired but kind. And he told her that they found something big near the Silent Expanse and that she should see it herself. And when the ship reached the coordinates, everyone on the bridge grew silent because before them floated a massive station, larger than any known design, and it looked dead and old, and yet there was a faint blue light coming from its core. And the scanners could not read what it was made of because the material did not match any record in the Union database. Darren sent a small team to explore the station, and Alara joined them even though she was afraid. And when they entered through a broken airlock, they found corridors covered in dust and strange markings on the walls. And Alara brushed her hand over them and realized they were letters from the same old language she had seen in the ancient fragments, and she whispered that it was human writing. And Darren looked at her, unsure what to say because humans were only stories, and he did not know if he should believe her. And as they went deeper into the station, they found a control room still working with weak power and a terminal that displayed one repeating phrase, and Alara worked fast to translate it. And when she did, she froze because it said, "We are returning." The words echoed through the silence of the old station, and Darren felt uneasy and asked if she was sure, and she nodded slowly and said the language was clear and old, but still human. And they recorded everything and returned to the Horizon, and when they sent the data to the Union Council, it caused great noise because if the message was true, it meant humans were real and that they were alive somewhere. And some members of the council feared it because they remembered the old stories of human wars and how they almost broke the galaxy, and others were curious and wanted to learn from them, but most thought it was a trick or a trap. And they ordered Darren and Alara to keep the findings secret until more was known. In the days that followed, Alara stayed on the Horizon studying the recordings again and again, and she found more signs hidden in the message that hinted the signal was not old, but new, and someone had sent it only months ago. And she told Darren that the humans were not gone but waiting and maybe watching, and Darren did not know what to think because the thought of humans returning made him both afraid and excited, because it meant the legends were true and that everything the Union believed about being the center of the galaxy was wrong. And one night, as he stood at the window looking at the dark side of the Silent Expanse, he thought he saw a faint glimmer in the distance, like a spark of light moving among the stars. and he whispered that maybe the myths were not dead at all but only sleeping and waiting for the right time to wake. The horizon floated near the edge of the silent expanse, and the crew spoke little because they all felt the weight of what they had found. And Captain Darren Holt kept thinking about the message that said we are returning. And he did not know if it was a promise or a warning. And Alara worked every hour trying to learn more from the old station's data, because she believed it still held secrets. And one night, while the ship drifted in the cold dark, she found another signal hidden behind layers of static, and when she cleared it, the sound came through like a low hum, followed by strange words that no one could understand. But she felt they carried emotion, like someone was calling from far away, and she ran to tell Darren, and he ordered the crew to trace the signal. And they found it coming from even deeper inside the silent expanse where sensors could not see clearly, and everyone grew nervous because no one had ever gone that far. The next day, Darren called a meeting and told his officers that they would go into the expanse because he believed answers waited there. And some crew members protested, saying that it was against Union law to enter that region. But Darren said that sometimes rules must be broken for truth, and Alara agreed because she felt that if they turned back now, the mystery would stay forever hidden. And so the horizon moved forward into the black mist, and soon their lights faded in the strange haze that swallowed the stars, and the ship's systems flickered, and the crew felt as if they were falling through emptiness. And then suddenly they saw something vast ahead of them floating in the dark, a shape larger than any station they had ever seen, and it glowed with faint blue lights that pulsed slowly like a heartbeat. And Darren ordered a scan, but the scanners again failed to read its material. And Alara whispered that it was not alien, but human. They sent a probe to the structure, and it vanished as soon as it touched the surface, and Darren clenched his jaw. But he told his team to prepare a second probe with a stronger signal, and this time they watched as it entered and sent images showing long corridors and strange machines still active after thousands of years, and symbols that matched the ones Alara had been studying. And one image showed what looked like a large round chamber filled with glass pods, and something inside them moved. And Alara gasped because she thought she saw a human face sleeping behind the glass, and Darren could not believe it. But the picture was clear, and before they could react, the probe's signal cut off, and all lights on the horizon flickered, and the message "we're returning" echoed again through every speaker on the ship like a whisper in a storm. And everyone froze because this time the voice was clear and strong, and it sounded alive. The Union command soon learned of the new signal, because the Horizon's transmission was automatically sent through the relay network, and it caused chaos in the council, because now they had proof that the humans were not myths, and the leaders argued for hours about what to do, some saying they should send a fleet to destroy whatever was inside the expanse before it woke, and others saying they should send ambassadors to make peace before fear turned to war, and a few believed it was all a trick made by pirates or machines. But deep inside, all of them felt unease, because if the stories about human strength were true, then the Union had no weapon to stand against them. And in the middle of this storm, Darren and Alara were ordered to remain silent and return home. But Darren disobeyed because he believed that history should not be hidden, and he told his crew that they would go back one last time to find the truth. When the horizon entered the dark field again, they saw the large structure open slowly like a door made of light, and inside, it was another ship, a design none had seen before, with smooth silver hulls and markings in old human language. And as they approached, their sensors went blank, and then a voice came through the radio saying identification required in a calm human tone. And Darren froze because the language was old Terran standard, and Alara answered softly saying they were from the Galactic Union and they meant no harm. And there was a long silence, and then the voice said humans remember the Union, and the channel closed, and the ship before them began to move, its engines glowing with bright white energy. And Darren ordered a retreat. But the engines of the horizon shut down as if something had taken control, and the alien structure around them pulsed with light again, and the words "we are returning" filled the air one more time. But now they sounded like many voices together, like a chorus. Alara felt tears in her eyes because she understood what it meant that the humans were waking from their long silence, and that they had never been gone, only waiting. And she looked at Darren and saw fear mixed with wonder. And he whispered that they needed to tell the truth no matter what, and the other crew members nodded, though some looked terrified. And then, without warning, the strange ship vanished in a burst of light, and when the horizon systems came back, the scanners showed No trace of it, only an empty void where it had been. But a new beacon had appeared on their star map, sending coordinates toward the core worlds of the Union, and Alara whispered that it was an invitation. And Darren said, "Then we follow." And the crew, prepared for the journey, knowing that whatever waited at the end would change the galaxy forever. And as the horizon turned toward the stars ahead, the voice from the message spoke one last time, soft and distant, saying, "Humanity endures." And the signal faded, leaving behind only silence and the quiet sound of their own hearts beating. The horizon moved through deep space, following the strange beacon that the hidden ship had left, and Captain Darren Holt sat quietly watching the stars drift past and wondering what waited at the end of the signal, because every part of him felt that something was changing. And Alara sat beside him, studying the data again and again, and she said softly that the code in the beacon was written in human language, but it was not old, it was alive, and she believed that someone wanted them to come. And Darren nodded, though he felt uneasy, because the stories of humans were always about power and chaos, and he did not know if the galaxy was ready for them to return. And as the ship drew closer to the beacon, they began to pick up new transmissions that sounded like voices speaking in many human tongues mixed together. And then they saw them, the ships that came out of the darkness, sleek and silver and fast-moving with patterns of light across their hulls like flowing rivers. And they surrounded the horizon but did not attack, and one voice came through the radio saying, "Welcome home." Darren and his crew stood silent because the voice was calm but powerful, and it spoke in perfect Union language. And Alara whispered that the humans had learned their language too, and then the largest of the ships moved forward, and from it came another message saying, "This is Admiral Jack Warren of the Terran Fleet. We have returned to claim our place among the stars." And Darren could not believe it, because he had read that name in the old data fragments, and he said to Alara that this man was supposed to be dead for thousands of years, and she said maybe he was, but maybe humans had learned things that others had forgotten. And Darren asked what they wanted, and the voice replied that they wanted peace, but they would not bow. And the words made the air on the bridge feel heavy, because peace was not what the Union feared, it was strength and pride that they remembered from the old tales. The human ships guided the horizon to a meeting point near an empty world, and there the humans landed first, and Darren took a small team with Alara to meet them. And when they stepped onto the ground, they saw the humans for the first time, not in stories but in flesh, and they looked much like the images from the archives. But there was something different in their eyes, something deep and sharp, like they carried the weight of many ages. And Admiral Warren greeted Darren with a nod and said, "It has been long since our kind walked this space." And Darren asked where they had been, and Warren said, "They went beyond the known stars after the Great Wars to rebuild and to learn and to heal, because they had nearly destroyed themselves. And now, they had come back not to rule but to share what they had become." And Alara listened with wonder, because she could feel that he spoke truth, though there was also sorrow in his voice. The meeting lasted for hours, and the humans told stories of worlds beyond the maps of the Union, and of machines that could bend space like water, and of knowledge that could heal planets and even bring dead soil back to life. And Darren realized that their power was not only in weapons, but in what they had built from pain. And he asked why they had sent the message, "We are returning." And Warren smiled and said, "Because myths must wake before they are forgotten." And Alara asked if the humans feared the Union, and Warren said, "No, we fear forgetting who we were, because that is the first step to becoming monsters again." And Darren felt respect for him, but also fear, because he knew that the Union would not take this easily. When the message of human return reached the Galactic Council, panic spread again, and fleets were sent to monitor the borders, and many worlds prepared for war, and propaganda spread that the humans would enslave them all. And Darren was ordered to detain the human fleet until the council decided what to do. But when he told Warren, the admiral only smiled and said, "Humanity bows to no council," and his ships moved away faster than any Union ship could follow, leaving behind trails of blue light, like fading memories, and Darren knew the Union could not stop them even if it tried. And Alara said maybe it was time someone reminded the galaxy that power did not always mean destruction. As days passed, strange things began to happen across the galaxy, because the human ships appeared in many systems, helping repair old stations, curing diseases, and teaching technology that others could not understand. and the people began to speak of them not as monsters but as saviors. And yet the council saw danger in their influence and declared them a threat, and Darren was called back to face questioning for disobeying orders. And Ilara was taken by the science division to study what she knew about human language, but even under watch she kept her notes hidden because she had promised Warren that she would protect their secrets until the right time. And in her heart she believed the humans were not here for war, but to test if the galaxy had learned anything from the past. One night while Darren sat in his cell on Valora Prime, he received a secret message that said they will come for you. And before he could reply, alarms sounded across the base, and outside he saw lights in the sky like shooting stars. And a moment later the humans came silent and fast, breaking through defenses without firing a single shot, and they freed Darren and Ilara and took them aboard one of their ships where Warren waited. And he told them that the Union had begun building weapons to strike against humanity and that a storm was coming. And Darren asked what he wanted them to do, and Warren said, "Tell them the truth that we are not their enemies but their mirror." And Darren realized then that the return of humans was not just about power but about forcing the galaxy to face itself and what it had become. As the human fleet prepared to reveal themselves to the entire galaxy, Ilara looked out the window of the great ship and saw the stars moving around them faster than thought, and she felt that something great was awakening, not just in space but in hearts, and she whispered that maybe myths were not just stories but warnings and promises all in one. And Darren stood beside her and said, "Then we must make sure this one ends in hope." And as the ship moved toward the core worlds, the humans began their return not as conquerors but as a people who had come home after too long away, carrying both the scars of their past and the light of their new beginning. The human fleet moved closer to the center of the galaxy, and every world watched their approach with fear and curiosity, and Captain Darren Holt stood on the bridge of the great ship beside Admiral Jack Warren and Ilara, and he felt the weight of history pressing on them because what was once only myth now flew openly across the stars. And Warren said quietly that they must show the Union they came for peace and not conquest. And Darren said that the Union would not believe words, they would believe actions. And Warren nodded because he knew that fear was stronger than truth, and Ilara worked to prepare a message that would be sent to every system saying that humanity had returned to share knowledge. Not war, but before the message could be sent, the Union fleet appeared at the edge of the system, surrounding them with thousands of ships, and their leader demanded surrender. The human fleet did not move, and Darren watched the faces of the Union commanders on the screen, and he saw fear in their eyes, not hatred, but the fear of something they could not control. And Warren spoke calmly, saying, "We did not come to fight." And the Union commander replied that the council had decided humanity was too dangerous to exist again, and that they would be destroyed before history repeated itself. And Ilara whispered that it was happening all over again. The same fear that had destroyed the old worlds, and Warren looked at her and said, "Then we will show them that we are no longer the monsters they remember." And he ordered his fleet to power down all weapons and open communication channels to every ship, and as the lights dimmed, the Union fleet grew silent because no one expected humans to surrender without a fight. And Warren said to them, "We will not fire first, but we will not fall," and his voice carried across the stars like an echo of old times. Meanwhile, on Valora Prime, the council debated and many leaders shouted for war while others begged for peace. And in the shadows, a small group of officers planned something darker. They wanted to use the chaos to seize control of the Union itself. And they sent secret orders to one of the fleet commanders to fire on both sides and make it look like the humans started it, because they believed only a great war could unite the Union again. And when Ilara intercepted fragments of the hidden message, she showed them to Darren and Warren. And Darren said that if this attack happened, everything would burn. And Warren said, "Then we must stop it before it begins." And they took a small ship and flew toward the Union flagship, hoping to warn them before the traitors acted, but they were too late, because the first shot had already been fired. The explosion lit the darkness, and thousands of ships turned their guns at once, and chaos filled the void. And Darren shouted that it was a trap, and Warren ordered his ships to hold their fire. But some human pilots ignored him and fought back because they believed they were betrayed again. And the battle became a storm of fire and broken ships, and Ilara worked desperately to send a message to both sides saying, "Stop. This was never meant to happen." And as she sent it, she cried because she could. hear the screams of dying crews on every channel, and Darren piloted through the wreckage trying to protect both human and Union ships from crashing into each other, and Warren stayed calm, giving orders to save as many as possible because he still believed peace could be saved. Amid the destruction, one of the Union cruisers targeted the human flagship with a powerful weapon that could destroy everything nearby, and Darren saw it charging, and he knew what he had to do, and he told Alara to stay behind, and he flew his ship straight toward the cruiser to block its fire, and Alara screamed for him to stop, but he smiled and said, "Someone has to end the madness," and before she could answer, his ship collided with the cruiser, and the blast consumed them both, and the shockwave spread through the battlefield, and everything went quiet, and the firing stopped, and all that remained was the echo of his name on the comms, as both sides stared at the light fading in the distance. Warren stood in silence watching the explosion fade, and he whispered that sometimes one life can remind others of what they are fighting for, and Alara could not stop crying because she knew Darren had given everything to save them all, and she used the last of their communication power to send a message to every ship in the system saying the war ends now, and she played Darren's final transmission where he said, "If we destroy each other, then the myths will win, and we will become the monsters we fear." And his voice carried through the channels until even the weapons went silent, and slowly the Union ships began to retreat, and the human fleet did not follow. They just watched as the lights of the enemy faded into the distance, and in that quiet moment something changed because both sides saw that there was still hope. After the battle, the council called for talks, and Warren agreed to meet them, though many of his people warned it was a trap. But he said peace was worth the risk, and Alara stood beside him, though her heart still ached from Darren's loss. And when they entered the grand chamber of the council, every race watched them with suspicion but also curiosity. And Warren spoke first, saying humanity does not seek to rule, but to belong, and to learn from those who came after us. And he told them that they could not erase the past, but they could shape the future. And his words struck deep because they were simple and true. And one by one the voices of anger grew quiet, and the council voted to allow the humans a place among them. Though not everyone was happy about it, and some still plotted in the dark, but for the first time in ages the galaxy had chosen peace over fear. Later, when the human fleet returned to their ships, Alara stood by the window looking at the stars, and she said softly that Darren had given his life so that this could happen, and Warren placed a hand on her shoulder and said, "No one is ever truly gone when their choice changes the world." And as the ships turned toward the silent expanse where it had all begun, she thought about the message that started everything: "We are returning," and she smiled sadly, because now she knew it had never been a threat. It had been a promise that light always finds its way back even after the darkest silence. The galaxy was quiet after the great battle, and the wreckage of ships still floated between the stars like ghosts of the war that almost was, and the humans began to rebuild, slowly reaching out to the worlds that had once feared them. And Admiral Jack Warren stood on the bridge of his flagship watching the lights of far systems flicker back to life, and beside him was Alara, who now worked as the main link between the humans and the Galactic Council. And she often thought of Darren and how his sacrifice had made this peace possible. And Warren said that the hardest battles are the ones fought in hearts, not in space. And Alara nodded because she knew he was right. And every day she saw both sides trying to trust again, but trust was slow to grow after so much fear and loss. In the months that followed, the council agreed to let humans join as members, not rulers, and they were given a seat where they could share what they had learned, and the news spread through the galaxy. And many worlds sent messages of hope and curiosity, and even those who once hated them began to see that the humans were not the same as before. And Warren sent ships to help rebuild Union colonies that were hurt during the battle, and to teach new technologies that could heal damaged worlds. And Alara visited many of those places and saw children playing under skies once filled with fire, and she smiled because she felt that maybe the myths were truly ending, and a new story was beginning where humans were not the lost monsters of legend, but part of the great family of stars. But not all was calm, because there were still some who whispered in the dark that humans could not be trusted, and they worked in secret to break the peace by spreading lies and fear. And Warren knew that peace must be guarded as carefully as any fortress, and he sent small groups to find those who plotted against them. But he told his people to never act in hate, and Alara worked beside him to bring truth through words rather than weapons, and she spoke before many worlds, telling them that humanity's return was not about power but about remembering that every race could fall and rise again. And her words touched many hearts because she spoke not like a leader but like someone who had seen both the light and the dark. One day the council called for a great meeting to decide how the future would be shared among all. And for the first time humans were part of it. And Warren walked into the chamber wearing no weapon, only a small silver pin shaped like a star, and he looked around at the faces of hundreds of races and said, "We are all survivors, and if we cannot live together, then none of us will live at all." And his voice carried across the hall, and even those who doubted him stayed silent, because they saw truth in his eyes. And after long talks, the council voted to form a new alliance where all races, including humans, would share knowledge and defend one another. And when the vote passed, the chamber filled with light from the central dome, and the symbol of the Union changed to include a new star at its center representing Earth and all that it meant. Later that night, Alara stood on the balcony of the council tower looking at the stars, and she thought of Darren again. And she whispered that his dream had come true because the galaxy was no longer divided by fear. And as she watched the horizon, she saw a new ship rising into orbit carrying supplies to help rebuild the worlds near the silent expanse. And Warren came to stand beside her and said he would name the new fleet after Darren, so that no one would forget what he had done. And Alara smiled and said he would have laughed at the idea of ships carrying his name, but she also knew he would have been proud because he always believed that peace was worth any price. Time passed and humanity spread once more among the stars, but this time they walked carefully, learning from those around them and teaching what they had learned beyond the known space. And Alara traveled with them to record their journey, so that history would not forget again, and she saw many worlds where humans and aliens worked side by side, building cities and gardens, and she thought that maybe this was what humans were always meant to be, not conquerors but bridge builders. And Warren grew older, and sometimes he sat quietly in his chair looking at the stars with a small smile, saying that the galaxy finally felt like home again. And when Alara asked him what he thought the future would bring, he said it would bring both light and shadow, but that was the way of life, and that the true strength of humanity was never in its weapons but in its will to rise no matter how many times it fell. Years later, on the anniversary of the battle that ended the war, a memorial was built on a peaceful moon near Valora Prime, and people from every world came to see it, and at the center stood a simple stone marked with words that Alara had chosen. It said, "For those who remembered the myth and chose to believe," and she placed a small piece of Darren's ship at its base and whispered that he had come home. And around her the crowd stood silent, and then one by one, they began to place lights in the air that floated upward like stars until the sky was full of soft glowing trails. And Warren, who was now old, stood watching with tears in his eyes and said that maybe myths are not lies, but dreams waiting to be lived again. And Alara took his hand and nodded because she knew that he was right. When the ceremony ended and the ships began to leave, she looked once more at the stars, and she saw Earth's system shining bright on the new maps, and she felt proud because the name of humanity was no longer something spoken in fear, but in hope. And she whispered that humans had finally returned, not as legends or ghosts, but as living proof that no darkness lasts forever. And as the stars reflected in her eyes, she felt that somewhere out there, Darren was watching and smiling, and the galaxy moved forward into a new dawn where every race stood side by side and the myths of the past became the foundation of a brighter tomorrow.